In 7.8, what we're looking at is what we call phase shift. Okay, we're just going to kind of start that a little bit tonight, and we'll do this a little bit the next class, just to kind of get you going with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to add one more thing to this. There's one last piece of the puzzle we have to put together. We haven't done that yet. It's this little thing right here. X minus C, X plus C, like that. Now, go back to college algebra. Let me just see what you remember. Now you can just pay attention to this. You don't have to write this down. But let's take a parabola, for instance. Okay, you have f of x equals x squared. Let's say, for instance, that you had 2x minus 2 squared plus 5. Okay, what does the minus 2 do to that parabola? Takes you to the right. Okay, that's what we do in trig. We just call it a phase shift. Anytime we move something left or right, then it's a phase shift. Okay, if you put a plus there, like x plus 2 squared, what would that do? That would go to the left. Okay, so you want to make sure that you know how that works. All functions work the same way, regardless of what they are. So what we're going to be looking at with this is the structure we're going to be looking at. This probably should have been a cosine. I probably meant to do that as a cosine. So the idea is going to be this is a factored form when you have the omega in front of parentheses. In this case, it's multiplied out, so that's a non-factored form. So the period is always going to be on a sine and cosine, 2 pi over absolute value of omega. So we're going to work with that. And what I want to do tonight mostly is identify the phase shift and just do a very simple graph with a phase shift in it. Okay, so in general, the period is the width of the shape that repeats itself. So we're doing, again, the formula 2 pi over omega. Amplitude, we've already talked about. That's 1/2 the distance between the max and min. Okay, and in the amplitude, we're talking about sine and cosine. The absolute value of A, like we've already talked about, is the amplitude. Okay, now the phase shift is going to be C now. So what we're going to start looking at is the factored form, and that's going to represent a phase shift. So when you have x minus c, that gives you a phase shift. And since that's a minus, that means it's going to phase shift to the right c units, okay? If it's plus, I think that was intended to be a plus, that's a phase shift to the left c units like that. Okay, that's the idea. So what I'm trying to show you now is if you had something like y equals 3 sine, and just say that you had something like x minus pi over 2 plus 3, then here's what everything means. Okay, that's a phase shift to the right. All right, that is what? Up 3. What is that? Amplitude of 3, so what does that do? Stretches the waves. Okay, that's what you're trying to do. So this is kind of the last piece of the puzzle you have to do is work with a phase shift. Okay, and then in this equation, the d does these things. Plus d goes up to, minus d goes down to, like that. So the only thing that's new is the idea of a phase shift. Okay, so let's just go through and do a little bit of identifying and factoring to kind of finish this up here tonight then. So when I give you a trig function, if it has a phase shift, it's going to occur inside the parentheses plus or minus something. Now, you got two ways to do this. The way I like to get students to do this is do this in a factored form. And what I mean by that is you're going to factor that 3 out inside of its own parentheses. So let me go through this, and you want to write this down. So this is y equals negative 3 cosine. Then I'm going to draw a bracket, and then we're going to factor that like this. You want to be in the factored form before you identify the phase shift. Okay. Just backwards arithmetic in your head, and x goes there, right? Because 3 times x is x. Now, what goes here, really all you do to figure out what goes there is you just do the pi over 3, and you divide it by the 3 that you factored out. You get to a point where you start doing this in your head, but it always works this way. So you would do pi over 3 times 1/3, so what do you get? Pi over 9. So what goes here is a pi over 9. That's called the factored form. Now what you guys got to learn how to do, and I see students do this all the time, when you factor something, you got to make sure it's right. Agreed? Okay, don't waste your time. If you factor, make sure it's right. What's 3 times x? 3x. What's 3 pi over 9? See, it reduces. Everybody see what I'm talking about? When you multiply that straight across, you get 3 pi over 9, but it reduces back to that, okay? So what you want to do now is we just identify everything, okay? So the amplitude comes from that number. And remember, the amplitude's always a positive number, so that's going to be 3, okay? The period comes from that number. Okay, that's the omega number. So what you do on that is you do 2 pi over omega, so that's going to be 2 pi over 3. Okay, so we have that. Okay, now the phase shift is not pi over 3, it's this number right here, because it has to be in a factored form. So which way is plus pi over 9 going to go? To the left. Okay, the way that you want to do this, the way that my math lab requires you to do this, is since it phase shifts to the left, you want to put not pi over 9, but you want to put negative pi over 9 like that. Okay, if it's a negative, if it's going to the left, use a negative for the phase shift. Okay, does this function switch up or down? Is there any number making it go up or down? No, because it'd have to be at the end, wouldn't it? So there is nothing there. There's none there. Okay, so that's the first goal of this section, is being able to identify all the key points of your trig function. Okay, is everybody following that okay? Okay, let's do one last thing, and then I'll let you go, okay? All right, so let's look at one more issue where we do factored form. So I'm going to have you factor a 6 out of that. So we have y equals negative 5 minus 2, sine, take the 6 out, and then fill in the gap right there. Okay, so obviously 6 times x is going to be 6x. To get the other number, what you want to do is you want to do just pi over 2 divided by the 6 that you took out. Okay, the way you do that is you do pi over 2 times 1/6 because you do a reciprocal. So what's that going to be? Pi over 12. Very good. So you have to put that in a factored form unless it's already in a factored form. Now you're ready to identify everything, and then we're good. Okay, what's the amplitude of this function? 2. It's right there. That's your amplitude. So again, you got to do absolute value. Just make sure that you realize an amplitude's a distance, so it's positive. Okay, the period. What's the formula? 2 pi over omega. Omega is 6, so what do you get? 2 pi over 6, so that reduces to pi over 3. Okay, real simple. Okay, tell me what the phase shift is now. Pi over 12, which way? To the left. Okay, very good. Okay, so we have pi over 12, and it's negative because it's going to the left. All right, does this thing have a vertical translation anywhere? Yeah, what is it? This thing right here, that's down 5. Now that's on the other side. You're used to seeing the minus 5 at the end, but it's still the same thing. So that would be down 5 like that, okay? All right, so we'll work on that a little bit more in the next class, and we'll do a little bit of graphing with this, then we'll review. So I'd definitely start doing some of that reviewing for your test over the weekend.